The 2014 Reuters Institute Digital News Report is out today, and we're launching it at Edelman's offices in London with a panel session of some of the leading players in the UK market. Earlier on, I spoke to them and we discussed the findings.
People are still reluctant to pay for news, so somewhere between 7% in the UK, 22% in Brazil have paid for some kind of digital news in the last year, though we have seen more people having an ongoing relationship, having a subscription with a news organisation.
The message really seems to be, for the moment, as though we've reached a level of a certain number of people prepared to pay. Of those paying, they're going for a longer term relationship with the organisation, but there's a limited number of additional people who may pay. I think in the UK there's a further 7% say they might be willing to pay in the future. In other countries the figure's rather higher.
I think what it shows, more importantly, there are different models being created for news. So we're benefiting from being open and global and really embracing the social aspects of the web. Others, I think quite rightly, are building good business models around paid subscription, albeit with a smaller audience in the countries they're in. And what a paid subscription, the report clearly shows, is it reinforces the loyal audience coming through and sticking with the brands. What we're about is growth and expansion and building new audiences for The Guardian.
People will always tell you they don't want to pay for things until they find that they have to or that it's convenient. And the question for an organisation like us is, are we providing information, are we providing a service that people do feel they need to pay for? And that's the challenge. I do accept that there's a small percentage of people who say they're prepared to pay, but then we've had a small percentage of the population in terms of newspaper circulation as well. We're after a particular audience who have always indicated they are prepared to pay.
Reading the report, very positive about our business model. I think it was very interesting. Doesn't see paywalls are taking off, perhaps in the way some of the older media brands would like them to. Huffington Post is all about making sure our journalism and our opinion and comment that comes from our bloggers is available to as many people as possible. And what's been great to see in the 3 years we've been live in the UK is how advertisers and how brands are really connecting with the message that we're trying to get out there.
Can you tell us what are the major trends you've seen emerging in the past 12 months?
I think the most interesting thing for me is just the continued growth of smartphones and to a lesser extent tablets. So these tiny, powerful devices in our pocket bringing the news more frequently than ever before. So more people are using smartphones, more people are relying on smartphones. So 20% of our entire global sample now say that the smartphone is their main source of accessing digital news.
The report reinforces the move to mobile and the move to off-platform, which we've been talking about for 4 years and we're seeing on an absolute daily basis. The important part of that is it puts even more pressure on the economics of a news organisation. We're fortunate because we have funds to support our journalism for many years to come, but it does mean that we're going to have to try and find ways of monetizing our reader directly. Now, I don't think paywalls work because it closes off consumption, but what it does start doing is opening other ways of engaging money from your readers, particularly maybe around membership in our case, and other ways. So I think it keeps that's the way the economics are going to move in the market we're in.
What are the keys, as far as you're concerned, to persuading people to part with their money for news, so much of which they can get free online?
Well, I think the key thing is to understand that when we talk about news as journalists and as reporters, we tend to mean the information that just happened now, breaking news, whereas I think what people are looking for is deeper insight, deeper analysis, something they can take away and use. We're obviously have a business-based readership, and for them it is information they can use in their job, information they can use to make money. So we have to make sure that we're constantly providing that.
We're snacking more on news. We're not perhaps immersing ourselves in the way we used to with a long read over a newspaper. Though it's interesting that we also continue to read newspapers and continue to watch television. So part of it's about frequency. It's also a very social device. So a lot of people are also sharing a lot of news on smartphones. So the way in which we receive news now is quite often from our friends or through a social media feed. So actually the whole discovery patterns are also changing.
Print editions still produce the bulk of advertising revenues, and so the combination of digital and print seems to be the way to go forwards. Many publishers are doing rather well in getting digital paying subscribers. In the UK, people like the FT are doing rather well in that. But for the moment, one's looking at a hybrid world, a mixture of print and digital, and ideally getting people to pay for each.
I think there's space for everybody. I'm sure, it's very competitive, but users get their news from all sorts of places, and I think the report really highlighted that. So I think as long as the content you're creating is unique, has a point of view, is interesting, people want to read it, want to share it, want to comment on it, then there's a sort of positive outlook for lots of brands right now.
Richard Sandbrook, you've written an essay in the back of the Reuters digital news report about the growth of people saying that they are not fussed by reading partial as opposed to impartial news. Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
Well, I think it's one of the interesting findings this year is that there is, if you like, a difference, and perhaps a cultural difference in people's attitudes towards impartial news. One of the things people have been saying for a while in the digital environment is that the old journalistic norms of impartiality and objectivity are all a bit old hat, and these days we should just, buy into the news that agrees with our point of view, and journalists are open about their biases, that's all fine. What this research suggests is that actually for many audiences, particularly in Europe, Northern Europe, they still really value the old approaches, the impartial, objective approach. There are, as I say, cultural differences. If you're in Italy, if you're in the US, if you're in Brazil, then a bit more open to a more kind of approach with attitude, a partial approach, if you like. But a surprising number of the audience still want impartial news, and I think that's quite an interesting finding.
Is that a bit of hope for the future for the traditional mainstream media?
Well, I think it begs quite a lot of questions, because of course underlying that question of impartiality is something that Edelman does a lot of work on, is trust. Who do you trust in the media, and how do you know whether you can trust them or not? And that's a large part of what lies behind it. And how does a media organisation generate trust? And of course, in a globalised world, if there are cultural differences and different attitudes towards impartiality, and you're trying to build a global media brand, how do you manage that if audiences want different things from you and have different expectations? So it begs quite a lot of questions for the media sector.